You know, just a few years ago, the future of the auto industry looked like it was a done deal. It was electric, period. Giants like Ford and General Motors went all in, betting the entire company on it, pouring tens of billions of dollars into the dream. But that future didn't quite show up on time. Instead, what we got was a financial crisis so bad, people are calling it a bloodbath. So today we're going to unpack what went so horribly wrong with Detroit's massive gamble on EVs. All right, let's get into it. And this was the vibe back in 2021. The confidence was just off the charts. Ford CEO Jim Farley gets up and tells the whole world the company is 100% committed to an all-electric future. They spun up a whole new division just for EVs called Model E and started breaking ground on massive new factories. The government was for it, the media loved it. It really felt like this unstoppable revolution. They weren't just testing the waters. No, they did a cannonball into the deep end. The stakes just could not have been higher. And this is the result of that cannonball. A jaw-dropping $12 billion loss, and that's just for Ford since 2022. Look, this isn't a little misstep or a rounding error. This is one of the biggest corporate miscalculations we've seen in a long, long time. It's a number so huge, you just have to ask, how on earth did the promise of a bright new future turn into a financial black hole this deep, this fast? Well, that's the story we're going to figure out. Okay, so to really get how this happened, you have to put yourself back in the mindset of 2021. It was a perfect storm, really. On one side, you had governments pushing these super aggressive environmental goals. On the other, you had Wall Street looking at Tesla's stock price going to the moon and basically demanding that the old school guys get with the program. So Ford and GM, they felt like they had no choice. They went all in, committing billions and billions to create separate EV divisions, new supply chains, and factories built only for electric cars. They weren't just evolving, they were trying to force a revolution. And that attempted revolution brings us right to the heart of the problem, the money. In this next part, we're going to break down the numbers that show just how brutal this failed bet has been for their bank accounts. Because behind all the sleek car designs and the promises of a clean future are some of the absolute ugliest financial reports this industry has ever had to publish. Now, what's so wild here isn't just one bad year. It's the trend. It's a snowball rolling downhill, just getting bigger and faster. So in 2022, Ford's Model E division lost $2.2 billion. Okay, that's bad, but you could argue, hey, it's startup costs, right? But then 2023 happens, and the loss more than doubles to $4.7 billion. Then 2024 gets even worse, hitting $5.1 billion. And for 2025, they're on pace to bleed another $4 to $5 billion. This isn't a growth strategy. It's a slow-motion catastrophe. If those billions are kind of hard to wrap your head around, this number makes it painfully simple. At one point, Ford was losing around $36,000 for every single electric vehicle it sold. Just think about that for a second. They sell you a beautiful, high-tech F-150 Lightning for, say, $70,000, and it costs them over $100,000 just to build it and get it to you. That's before a single dollar spent on marketing. You can't make up for that by selling more. In fact, the more cars they sold, the more money they lost. It's a completely broken business model. So how is it even possible to lose that much money per car? Well, it was a mix of everything going wrong at once. Battery and component costs were sky high, a lot of them coming from East Asia with tariffs attached. The automakers had to throw a ton of money at dealers just to build new charging stations and service bays. But the real killer was the miscalculation on scale. They built these gigantic factories designed to pump out hundreds of thousands of EVs a year. But when the buyers didn't show up in those numbers, all the massive costs of keeping those plants open had to be spread over way fewer cars, making each one insanely expensive to produce. They built a machine that could only make money off volume they never came close to hitting. And this brings us to maybe the most important part of the story. These massive losses, they didn't just happen in a spreadsheet. They happened because the actual people who were supposed to buy all these cars, everyday folks, took a long, hard look at what was being offered, and in huge numbers just said, nope, not for me. So now we're going to look at the very practical, real-world reasons why the mainstream market flat out rejected the all-electric future they were being sold. All right, reason number one, and it's the big one, the price tag. The average EV was selling for nearly $59,000. The average gas car, about $48,000. That's an $11,000 gap right off the bat. For most families, that's not a small difference. That is the difference between we can afford a new car and no way we can't. And no amount of talk about saving money on gas down the road was enough to get most people to ignore that initial sticker shock. And this chart just lays out the average car buyer's brain perfectly. The concerns are all about practicality. The number one barrier is the lack of charging stations. But look how close behind that is the high price and worries about range. These three things create this giant wall of doubt in a buyer's mind. People start picturing themselves stuck on the side of the road, or a simple road trip turning into a nightmare of planning and waiting at chargers. These aren't just little worries. These are absolute deal breakers that the car companies totally underestimated. And here's the hidden trap that really started to scare off the smart buyers. Depreciation. The value of a used EV was just falling off a cliff. Imagine buying a brand new $60,000 car, and in just 3 years, it's only worth $24,000. You've lost 36 grand. A similar gas car might lose half that. And why? Well, the tech is changing so fast, and manufacturers kept slashing prices on new EVs to try and sell them, which just destroyed the value of the used ones. People who do their homework did the math and realized it was a financial disaster waiting to happen. And this number tells a really important story. A lot of that early EV demand wasn't entirely real. It was being propped up by a huge $7,500 federal tax credit. And we got the ultimate proof of this when the government changed the rules on where batteries could come from, and suddenly a bunch of popular EVs weren't eligible for the credit anymore. The result? Sales for those cars plunged 41% almost overnight. It proved that for a massive part of the market, the decision to buy an EV wasn't about the car, it was about the free government money. And when the money went away, so did the buyers. But you know, this whole story isn't just about failure. There's actually a surprise winner that emerged from all this chaos. While the big automakers were setting billions of dollars on fire with pure EVs, a different technology, one that everyone had kind of forgotten about, was quietly making a massive comeback. This is the plot twist of the story, where we find out what people actually wanted to buy all along. I mean, just look at this. In the first quarter of 2025, hybrids made up 22% of all new cars sold. That is a huge slice of the pie. And what's more, it's growing way faster than the EV market is. And this wasn't because of some government mandate or huge subsidies. This was a grassroots movement. This was everyday people voting with their wallets, and the message was clear. They wanted a practical middle ground. And it's really no mystery why, right? When you put them side by side like this, the choice for the average person becomes crystal clear. Every single thing that made people nervous about EVs, hybrids had an answer for. The cost? It's a little more than a gas car, not a huge leap. Range anxiety? Gone zero. You've still got a gas engine. Refueling? 5 minutes at any of the millions of gas stations that are already there. Hybrids gave people what they wanted. Better gas mileage and lower emissions without forcing them to completely change their lives. If you ever want to know what's really happening in the car market, forget the press releases. Just look at what's sitting on dealer lots. This metric, day supply, tells you how long it would take to sell every car a dealer has in stock. And as you can see, dealers are literally drowning in EVs. They have a 99-day supply just sitting there, collecting dust. Meanwhile, they can barely keep hybrids on the lot with only a 52-day supply. The market couldn't be screaming a clearer message if it tried. So this brings us to the final, really painful conclusion to this whole saga. The automakers and the government tried to force a certain future onto the market. But the market, well, it had its own ideas. And the number one rule of business is that the market always wins. When a multi-trillion-dollar market speaks, you either listen or you get crushed. And the consequence here is billions of dollars in wasted investments and factories that are now basically useless. And this is the corner they painted themselves into. It's what we call the factory trap. When they went all in, they built these incredible high-tech factories that were designed to do one thing and one thing only: build EVs. The assembly lines, the robots, the supply chains, none of it can be easily switched over to build the hybrids and gas cars that people are actually lining up to buy. So now they're stuck with these enormously expensive buildings that are barely running, just burning cash every single day. And if you want to see what admitting a mistake of this size looks like in black and white, here it is. General Motors had to take a $1.2 billion accounting charge. That's just the official corporate way of telling investors, hey, remember all those factories we spent a fortune building? Yeah, well, it turns out they're not worth what we paid for them because we were dead wrong about demand. It's about as direct an admission of a massive strategic failure as you're ever going to see. And here's the kicker. According to the analysts at Goldman Sachs, just pivoting back to building the hybrids that people actually want could add between $15 and $22 billion back to the industry's profits. I mean, that one sentence tells you everything you need to know. It's the price tag of how much profit was literally vaporized by betting the farm on a technology the market just wasn't ready for. So when you boil it all down, what was the real problem here? It was this classic mismatch between a top-down dream and a bottom-up reality. You had governments and corporate boardrooms pushing a future based on regulations and ideals. But you had real people, real families, making choices based on their budgets, their time, and their need for convenience. The shiny new technology they were being sold just didn't solve their day-to-day problems. It actually created new ones. So really, it all comes down to this incredibly painful 4-step lesson that cost the auto industry billions of dollars to learn. Step 1, they assumed that just because the government pushed for something, buyers would automatically show up. Step 2, they invested billions based on that faulty assumption. Step 3, they discovered, the hard way, that consumers had other plans and actually wanted the practical hybrid option. And step 4, the result: a financial disaster and a humiliating forced retreat back to the very technology they were so desperate to escape. And that leaves us with the one big question at the end of all this. Was the whole idea of pushing for an all-electric future fundamentally wrong? Or was it a case of a perfectly good idea that was just pushed way too hard, way too fast, long before the technology, the infrastructure, and most importantly, the average consumer was actually ready for it? That's the multi-billion-dollar question that these companies are going to be wrestling with for years to come.